Thank you everyone for joining us for another Learning Lunch hosted by formatapproved.com. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Online Education with Format Approved, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's Learning Lunch is titled Maintaining HIPAA Compliance Through Email Security, Archiving, and Encryption. We're joined today by Scott Barlow of Reflection. Scott has a wealth of experience in compliance and hosted services markets, including email and web security, archiving, e-discovery, and email encryption. We are pleased to share his expertise with you today, which you can read more about on your screen while I go over some brief housekeeping notes. Remember that you can ask questions of our presenter at any time during today's session by entering them into the chat area. In the second half of our session, we'll address as many questions as time allows. If we do run out of time, answers to all submitted questions will be posted to our website and sent via email link later in the week. Also, remember that all registered attendees of today's session will receive an email with links to both the slides and the recorded version of this event. So people often ask us if they can get a copy of the slides or the recording, and we send out both to you after the session. Well, Scott, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This is an important subject, and we're really excited to hear your perspective on it, so let's dive right in. So first question here, what are some security solutions that providers and business associates can use to comply with HIPAA regulations for email?
Well, email by default is not a secure way of communicating, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think that email is still the primary communication tool for pretty much everything these days. And I think that, whether it's a solution provider or a covered entity, a business associate or covered entity, regardless of what it is or who you are, I think there's a lot of solutions that can be implemented to help comply with the HIPAA regulations around email, specifically email encryption. And we'll get into each of these components as we go forward in the webinar. But I think email encryption is going to be vitally important because one of the primary violations that we often see around HIPAA is the distribution of protected health information, or PHI, being sent out via plain text email. And as I mentioned, email is not a secure way of communicating, so you need some level of automated and transparent scanning engine to detect anything around, the PHI that is being sent out via plain text email. There's also some regulations or some stipulations in HIPAA that require patient-doctor communication to be archived. And so you would also need a compliant email archiving solution. Compliant meaning that nothing in the archive can be modified or edited in any way, but you also need to be able to capture both internal communication, external communication, and internal. So you have the incoming email, you have the outgoing email, and then you have the internal email communication. That all needs to be captured and archived in a compliant format. And lastly is email security. And when we talk about email security, we focus on anti-spam and antivirus. A lot of times there will be a virus that gets distributed in the wild, and if an end user receives a virus, they click on it. Most recently has been the CryptoLocker virus. It's called ransomware, and you have to pay anywhere between $300 and $1,300 to decrypt the files that exist on your PC. And when you do that, you're actually disclosing your credit card information to some unknown user through a variety of different mechanisms, whether it's Bitcoin or whatever. And so all of these solutions need to go into really hardening the email architecture or the email infrastructure at an organization. But more importantly, they need to all work together. Archiving encrypted email is basically useless because you can't decrypt the message once it's in the archive. In addition to that, archiving spam or encrypting spam or viruses incoming or outgoing is just going to waste a lot of space. So there's really a need to implement all three services that can work together seamlessly to help you comply with the HIPAA regulations. And just one final note on this slide. We often have a lot of customers and partners contacting us asking, are you HIPAA compliant? And that's really the wrong type of question to ask. There's no single technology that can make anybody HIPAA compliant. HIPAA compliance is it really centers around the mixture of people and process and technology. And I've seen some other HIPAA experts, say that it's 80% people, 15% process, and 5% technology, which I pretty much agree with. I think from an end user standpoint, you also need to educate those end users that have access to this PHI what is and is not okay to send out via plain text email. And we'll get into that a little bit as we move forward in the presentation.
Absolutely. But I tell you, in our discussions with medical providers, we certainly see a tremendous need for this sort of solution around email. So give us more information about what the sort of information that shouldn't be sent via unsecure email.
Yeah, so I mean, basically anything, there's two acronyms that I like to use, or that is used pretty ubiquitously in the industry. The first is personally identifiable information, or PII, and the second is protected health information. I know this is a webinar focused on HIPAA, but there are also state data breach notification laws that apply to healthcare organizations, and they basically require the protection of the state residents' protected health information. I'm sorry, personally identifiable information. So, being from Massachusetts, if you haven't figured that out yet, our data breach notification law requires that anybody that has access to the Social Security number or the credit card number or the driver's license number, et cetera, of a Massachusetts resident, put mechanisms in place to protect that information from being sent out via plain text email. You also have other things like tax records and driver's license numbers and check stubs and loan applications and insurance policies. There's a variety of things that we often see when email is being sent out to specific domains and specific users on the internet. Just to give you an example, if you're a covered entity or you're a physician office and you send the results of a specific test to an AOL user, and that AOL user clicks "this is spam" for whatever reason, maybe they misclicked or maybe they are angry with the results or whatever. If that happens, that email, because they said that this is spam, is going to get distributed, to the AOL security team. And the same thing happens with Yahoo and, a variety of other ISPs that you're communicating with out there. And so as soon as they click "this is spam," you don't know who's going to get access to that information. So you have no control over what the recipient of the message is going to do with it. Therefore, you need to find a way to secure that email as it's being sent out. There's a variety of other things that should not be sent out via unsecured email. And if we can go to the next slide, when I talk about unsecured email and secure email, this is how email appears to work to an end user. It's going to go from their PC to the recipient's PC. That's actually not how email works. And I think this is a very important slide because it's going to show you that when you send an email, it's going to reside on your company network. Then it's going to go to your mail server. It could go to a data leakage prevention application or appliance on your infrastructure. And then it's going to go out into the cloud. And when it goes out into the cloud, you have multiple routers and switches and all kinds of stuff that can be tracked. And then it will be, via the internet, the DNS protocol, it's going to be delivered to the recipient. And on the recipient side, you might have an anti-spam or an antivirus solution. If it's an ISP, there's going to be a million different devices in between their gateway or their firewall and the inbox of that particular user. And then, if it's a corporate network, it's going to go to a mail server. It might go to a company network. And in the middle between your gateway and the recipient's gateway is where a lot of this stuff is being detected and being analyzed. And there's a few important notes on this. I mean, sometimes you have an end user just trying to do their job, and they might send an Excel file to their home email address in order to finish working on their particular project after hours. If that was to happen, you know what? They're going to distribute a Excel file that could contain every possible, patient record that exists within your physician's practice out via plain text email. And if it's being sent to their ISP or their home personal email address, now you have an issue. The other thing is if they have their email synchronized down to their email client, whether it's Outlook or whatever, and you don't have an encrypted hard drive and then that PC gets stolen, it's a very similar scenario. You have access, or whoever steals that PC now has access to all of the information. There's other scenarios where you plug a USB into the computer, you save all your documents, and then you take it home with you, and you might lose it or drop it in the parking lot or whatever. So there's a lot of things that go into the risk of violating the HIPAA policies, but I think email is going to be the easiest way to create a violation, because all you have to do is attach a file and hit send, and if you don't have some of these encryption solutions or data leakage protection solutions installed internally in your network, then that email is just going to be sent out via plain text, and it often creates a pretty significant issue, especially when it's going to an ISP like I explained with AOL.
I think that's a great point, that a lot of people are just trying to get their work done, and they certainly don't have any ill intent, but we know of breaches where people have been fined because they use unsecure email to send that PHI, so it's a real risk that people need to face. Mm-hmm. So there's the problem. What can be done to fix it? How can people secure email, and can secure email be used to send information such as PHI?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple of major points on this slide. The first thing that you want to do is not rely on the end user to make a decision on what needs to be encrypted or what can or cannot be sent out via plain text email. There's a lot of encryption solutions that are out there that will say all you have to do is mark a message confidential in Outlook and that will automatically encrypt it. Or you just put a keyword in the subject line and that will encrypt the outgoing message. That's great, and it's step one, I think, towards a secure email solution. But oftentimes, and I know I'm guilty of this all the time, somebody says, hey, what's your credit card number for whatever? And I'll just send out my credit card number via plain text email. It's not a violation, obviously, because it's my own credit card number, but we have an encryption solution, and I never before actually was thinking, I want to stop. I'm going to mark this message confidential in Outlook, and then I'm going to hit send. So you're really relying on the end user to be conscious of exactly what they're doing at every moment during the day, and that's often a risky proposition. So on the slide here, I put in automated outbound encryption, and encrypted data is exempt from breach reporting by the HITECH Act. And so what that basically means is don't rely on the end user to make sure that something is marked confidential. What you want to do is you want to apply, a predefined subject matter lexicon to the outgoing message. For instance, there are solutions out there that will apply a HIPAA lexicon to scan the content of the email and the content of an attachment for specific health identifiers and health terms and social security numbers. And in the scenario where you find an outbound email that contains health identifiers and health terms, instantly that will automatically get encrypted, and a notice will be sent to the end user that, hey, you have an encrypted solution, click this link, or sorry, you have an encrypted email from this user, from the sender, with this subject line. Please click this link to download the email or to get access to the email and download any of the attachments. The HIPAA lexicons also require or scan for social security numbers. So if there's a social security number and an email, instantly that needs to get encrypted. The other important aspect to this is the ability to send an encrypted email back to the original sender, to you and to your customers. And the way to do that is when that recipient clicks on that link, they'll have access to a portal. In that portal, there should be a reply button. If there's not a reply button, find a different solution, because what will happen is if they just get the email to their inbox, they could forward it to somebody. They might, reply, and they're not going to encrypt that message. So there's a lot of risk when sending an encrypted email to somebody, and it's not secured in a portal where the recipient has to log in, authenticate themselves, and get access to that message. I also put in here archive communication. There's a lot of reasons to archive email, and we're going to get into that in a few slides, but when you archive all of this communication, it's going to be used for a variety of different purposes, whether it's email continuity. It could be used for, to prove in court that the message was in fact encrypted, or, that this user sent this message 5 times to 3 different people. For the owners of a business, that's incredibly valuable data to have access to. It can resolve HR conflicts. It can prove contracts. It can, it can do a lot of different things, and we'll get into that in a second. But, make sure that that the secure email solution that you're using is automated and transparent to the end user, because a lot of times when you implement a solution that requires end user behavior, instantly there's pushback. And if it's completely automated and completely transparent, they really don't know what's happening behind the scenes. They can continue to operate as they always do, and now you have a more secure way of communicating instantly to your customers and to your patients.
So let's dive in a little bit and tell us more, if you would, about how encryption actually works.
So there's a few different ways, and I touched upon it a little bit in that last slide, but there's a configuration, right? So what will happen is, if you have a solution that you will first scan the outgoing email to make sure you're not sending outbound spam or outbound viruses, and then that message should get archived before it gets passed on to the encryption solution. When it gets passed onto the encryption solution, it will basically go through a policy-based encryption engine. And as I mentioned, those predefined subject matter lexicons like HIPAA. And there are other ways that you can implement, a encryption action. You can do a force keyword. You can put a keyword in the subject line. So if you have maybe a fax machine or some EMR solution that's going to automatically communicate to an end user, and it always is going to have an appointment reminder in the subject line. Things like that will, really benefit from the ability to, put a keyword into the subject line that if that keyword is found, it will immediately get encrypted. You can also apply a variety of other actions. You can encrypt the email, you can redirect the email, or you can block the email. So there's a variety of lexicons, and one of the lexicons is profanity. I'm not going to really get into what's in the profanity lexicon, but if you have an acceptable use policy for email within your organization, and part of that includes the protection of sending profane words or phrases or vulgar words or phrases out via plain text email, the encryption solution should be able to detect that and block it. There's also a variety of secondary actions where you can send the original sender of the message a notification email that the message was in fact encrypted. You can copy to a specific individual. So if you have a chief compliance officer or a chief security officer, and I'm an end user that sends out an email that the HIPAA lexicon detected a violation and encrypted it and sent it on to the end user recipient, I can automatically get copied, or the CSO or the chief compliance officer can automatically get copied on that message. And that way they can really do a much better job at identifying what is and is not being sent out of the organization. And then you can insert outbound or inbound disclaimers when it comes to communicating PHI out via plain text email.
That's great. Now, you know, what you were saying before about the ability to respond, that is just absolutely critical, I think, because it hardly makes any sense to encrypt outgoing and not ingoing as well, but that's all very useful information.
Yeah, and it also makes it convenient for, you know, the recipient of a message. I think a lot of times, you know, and I've gone through this quite a bit. You know, I refinanced, and I had a loan application come into my inbox from one of the banks, plain text. It was actually a Word document, you know, and all of my personal information was there. We also have some, you know, the largest bank in the world communicated with one of the folks on my team via plain text email, and it included their bank account information, their name, their social security number, plain text email.
Wow.
Other, you know, businesses, other financial institutions have sent me encrypted email, and, you know, I went through the process. Excuse me. I went through the process. I decrypted the message. I downloaded the email, and then I just responded to them in a separate message without anything that contained, you know, my personal information. So, you know, the ability for me to, you know, encrypt and just reply to an encrypted email, I think is incredibly valuable. There's also ways that you know, a covered entity can allow, you know, a specific patient or one of their customers to initiate a secure message via a link on the website that says, you know, send us a secure email. And all of that can be pre-configured, you know, using most encryption solutions that are out there. And it's a matter of convenience. I mean, me picking up the phone, having to wait, you know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you know, for a doctor to get on the phone or to schedule an appointment or to do any of that stuff. I mean, people are going 100 miles an hour these days, and, you know, most employees are expected to do more given the same amount of time and resources that they currently have. So it's very difficult, you know, for people who live in a digital and completely automated world to stop and then revert back to, you know, spending 10, 15 minutes on the phone on hold trying to schedule an appointment. So a lot of these, you know, different practices and you know, the ability to automate that whole process via, you know, the web and more dynamic scheduling systems that are out there, you know, are adding risk. But I think that if you pay attention to what some of the solutions are out there to encrypt, you know, not just email, but the data transfer using, you know, SSL and TLS protocols, I think it's, you know, going to, you know, really benefit a lot of the businesses that are on the call today.
Those are great points. It's got to be user-friendly, and I think medical providers, you know, are still in that phone world you're talking about, but their customers, their patients are going to have an increasing expectation to have the sort of access you're talking about. So, again, it just calls for the need for these solutions. So we know a little bit about, you know, that compliance requires encrypted email and for different situations. Tell us more about why it's important to encrypt email that maybe some of our audience hasn't thought about all of the different ins and outs of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so if you don't encrypt email and you know, you have a violation, and it's not necessarily HIPAA by itself. I mean, if you have a data breach notification for a specific state, or, you know, perhaps you could be a very large hospital that has, you know, patient data for residents of, you know, 40 different states. You know, in addition to the HIPAA regulations, there's also the data breach notification laws that are out there. And, you know, if you have a breach of 40 different state residents' data, you know, you're going to have to alert the media. There's a reputational risk. There's, you know, there's a lot of different issues. There are going to be a lot of fines associated with that as well. But as, you know, on these bullet points, email encryption is vital to the overall security, not just of your, you know, organization, but to your customers and your end user patients. I don't personally want my, you know, my health records or my, you know, financial records or my social security number. I don't want anything to be sent out via plain text email, because I don't want to have to go through, the process of preventing identity theft and credit monitoring and all that stuff. I mean, that's just an inconvenience for, the end user that you have information for. But I think unencrypted email can also expose sensitive information, and there's lawsuits, there's negative PR, there's the loss of intellectual property, and that's the loss of intellectual property is often centered around manufacturing firms and sales organizations, insurance companies, things like that. But the benefit of encrypting email is now you have the ability to immediately deliver confidential information and eliminate the costs of manually sending it, whether it's via via the mail, or we see a lot of people that send a zip file, and that zip file will essentially contain the contents of the PHI, and it's going to be password protected. And then in a separate email or on a voicemail or something, you send the password to that zip file that has a password. That's often very, very manual. It's very labor intensive. You can also copy the information to a CD or tape and ship it. But the challenge is email is still, and I see for the foreseeable future, the preferred method of communication. I mean, it's simple. I open up my email client, I hit Control-N for a new message. I type somebody's name, it auto-populates. I put a subject line, I type something in the message, I attach it, I hit send, it's done. Second, I have, what I wanted to communicate from me to somebody in the outside world communicated. And, a lot of times, when I'm going through that process, I have to stop and think myself, should I really be sending this out via email? And I think there's a few different things that, and on the previous slide, we talked about what can be done to secure the email and, how encryption works and then why encrypt email. And, I think regardless of how much money is spent on educating end users on the technology that a lot of these organizations have in place today, you need to also focus on limiting access to, PHI to the few people that are required to have it or that need it, but to continue to educate the end users. And I think that there's some very, very effective HIPAA training and certification programs. Obviously, we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes here, but, continue to go through the ongoing HIPAA education process. Moving forward, it's going to be critically vital to your organization in protecting, the intellectual property and your customers and your patients from, damaging your reputation out there in the industry.
Just out of curiosity, Scott, would a password-protected zip file be considered secure, even as a workaround?
That's actually debated quite a bit. There are tools out there that can crack password-protected zip files. I don't know the answer to that question. I assume that it would be, but I'm not going to risk that. I mean, I wouldn't risk, putting that together because, now I'm sending a password to that encrypt or to that password-protected zip file in another plain text email. So if somebody is savvy enough to put, some technology at the gateway of your firewall, they could capture both, and now they can, put it together. But there's also no password kind of minimum requirements for, things like that. So chances are the password is going to be password or password 123 or welcome or, your dog's name or whatever. I mean, it's not going to be, a mixture of 9, alphanumeric digits with some special characters like, a lot of the organizations are required to use today.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of curiosity out there about archiving. What's a compliant archive?
So we often see customers and partners, say, I don't need an archive, I have a backup. And, there's a significant difference between backing up mail server or backing up email, and producing a compliant archive for the purpose of responding to a legal request or legal proceedings. A backup is essentially a snapshot at a point in time, where an archive is an active solution that will grow over time. Backups are typically saved for maybe 10 days, just based on storage or 10 iterations and things like that. When you're getting into email, you need to focus on the ability to maintain a historical reference or a knowledge base of email communication over time, for the purpose of document compliance and performance and audits and resolution of commercial conflicts. So a compliant archive actually saves messages indefinitely. It will provide some specific retention options. I mean, ultimately, you want a solution that is going to keep a copy of every message forever. And if you have to pay for storage, make sure that you have an anti-spam solution in place, because as the solution or as the archive grows, it's just going to cost you more and more money. There's also other things that are out there for deduplication and single instance storage. For instance, if you have a single email or a single Word document that contains instructions for follow-up after a specific procedure, and you send that out time and time and time and time again, and it's a megabyte in size, say there's 1,000 different messages that get sent out. That's going to be a gigabyte of the same exact document, when it should be 1 megabyte that has pointers to all of the 1,000 different emails that it was sent as an attachment on. So make sure that when you're looking at a compliant archiving solution, it's either unlimited storage, or you make sure that it has single instance storage or deduplication. The users also do not have the ability to manipulate the archive in any way. Most of the people on the call probably know that if you use an email client such as Outlook, you can essentially pull up a specific message that exists within your inbox, and then you can go to Actions, and then there's a little tool called Edit Message. And I can go through and I can change. If it's something that says 3 minutes, I could say 10 minutes, and I can hit Save. Now that's in my Exchange server as 10 minutes instead of the 3 minutes that it normally was on the original message. So you need to have a compliant archive that captures this information before it ever gets to your Exchange server or to your email server. So that often begs for a cloud solution where you route your inbound and outbound email through an email security solution to scan it for spam and viruses and volume-based attacks. Also make sure that you can spool the email for an extended period of time in case the mail server goes down or the internet's out or the power's out for whatever reason. But then capture that information in the cloud so that it's going to be captured before it ever hits the email server. Because once it hits the email server, if you're backing up email from the email server and that message changes, it's most likely going to be updated in the archiving solution, and that often causes a problem or a conflict in the integrity of the data. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to capture the inbound, the outbound, and all internal communications. And there's a lot of really effective solutions that can do that completely in an automated fashion. But you also want to make sure that, I mentioned when you send an outbound email, you want it to scan for viruses on the outbound side and then get archived and then, get encrypted if it needs to get encrypted. On the inbound side, essentially what will happen is that response should be decrypted, then scanned for spam and viruses, then archived. So now you're archiving the email in a plain text format. It was transmitted over the internet in a secure fashion, but it needs to get decrypted, archived, and then sent to your mail server in a secure way. And so all of these solutions, as they work together, are going to really be an effective solution so that you're not trying to figure out how to route email from your email security solution to your archive, to your encryption, and what happens on the inbound side when you archive an encrypted email. That's useless. It doesn't mean anything. So a compliant archive is a vital component in this, much larger email, HIPAA compliance, discussion. But also encrypt email at rest. A lot of times if you have your own mail server or if you're using a hosted email option, the more your email grows, the more it's going to cost. And so if you have your own internal email server, if you implement an archiving solution, now you have all of that email archived, encrypted, backed up, secure. You can now begin to lower the size of each inbox that exists within your organization and then just provide a very simple link, whether it's through a browser or through an integration with the email client, to get access to the archived data and have that archived data, searchable. Have it searchable for, keywords, to address, from address, or to domain, from domain, time period, be able to search in the content of a specific attachment as well. And that encrypted email that exists in the archive kind of at rest needs to be secured and encrypted, as does the email in transit or the dynamic email as it's flowing from one recipient to another recipient.
So you've touched on some of this, but tell us a little bit more about why a compliant archive is such an important tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did touch upon it, but I think there's a lot of different reasons why you need a compliant archive. I mean, so in the U.S. specifically, I'm sure we have some folks outside of the U.S. on the call, but in the U.S. specifically, there's something called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which require you to produce all electronically stored information now during the discovery phase of a lawsuit. And so the FRCPs basically apply to any organization that can be sued in civil court. And that I'm sure includes everybody on the call today. You also have storage management and optimization, as I mentioned. As the email continues to grow, it's going to get more and more at risk of becoming corrupt, and it's going to slow down. So it's going to reduce the performance of your employees. There's also an estimated 80% of corporate intellectual property stored in email. So how do you take that 80% corporate intellectual property and turn it into a knowledge base, or turn it into something that is useful for your own internal purposes, whether it's on the HR side, or if it's a compliant or resolving a commercial conflict, legal proceeding. And the other thing is disaster recovery and email continuity. A lot of folks on the call might have an email server in a closet, and in that closet there might be a window. And that window, somebody can just break that window, take your server out, and all your email is gone. So in addition to obviously backing up files and documents, you need to back up your email. And this is going to provide a disaster recovery solution. And then email continuity. A lot of the archiving solutions that are out there today will provide an email continuity solution. So because the email will be forked over to the archive in the cloud from an email security application, you'll have access to that data regardless of what's happening on your mail server internal to your network. So if your mail server goes down or the power's out, and a great example was, Hurricane Sandy here in the Northeast, we saw about 1,200 customers have their email servers go down because the power was out at their office location. And they were able to just basically log into an archive and continue to send and receive email. I mean, it's going to be important for a variety of reasons. Most importantly, to let family and friends know that you're okay. You can obviously pick up the phone and call, but a lot of the phone lines were down. So on the email security side, or the email continuity side, you could basically just log into the the archive, whether it's via your phone or via a local Starbucks or whatever your preferred coffee shop is, and send an email from the archiving solution. Hey, everything is good. I'm here. But then also keep the business going. We had some partners down in Texas when Hurricane Rita, I think it was, and all of their offices were washed away. And we had the archiving solution in place, and they were able to send and receive email for, I think it was up to 30 or 45 days that they needed it, to keep their businesses alive. And, we have some quotes from partners saying, it saved my business. So it's like insurance. I mean, an archiving solution is nice to have. A compliant archiving solution is, a necessity, but you're not going to need the email continuity portion until you need it. It's like insurance. You don't need it until you need it. So it's important to have it in place prior to, having the need to provide disaster recovery or email continuity. And then the last point that we touched on earlier was if an audit or legal action continues or occurs, you can use the archive as a compliant paper trail. We had a really good example of a pharmaceutical, a company that actually builds pharmacies submitted a bid, and they were not included in the final RFP. And they contacted the company that put out the RFP, and they said, "Why aren't we included?" They're like, "We never got your application." Well, the partner actually logged into the archive, showed that because it was compliant, you can't edit, modify, or transfer or delete in any way whatsoever. They were able to show that the RFI was submitted in time, and turns out that the recipient's email security solution blocked the RFI as spam. They were allowed to participate in the RFP, and they won it. And it was a $7 million contract. So the ability to implement a solution for, literally dollars per user per month, won this one customer a $7 million bid just because they had it in place prior to actually needing it. So there's a lot of reasons why you need a compliant archive, but in general, having a compliant archive in place is only going to benefit you moving forward.
So here's a question we hear a lot. Do I need to sign a business associate agreement, which is kind of a way of saying, who needs to, and where can people get a template of one?
Yeah, this is a great question. We get this all the time. And, feel free to jump in, Chris. I know that you have a lot of experience around this as well. But so who needs to sign a business associate agreement? Any company that's doing business with a covered entity basically needs to have a business associate agreement in place. And we have a lot of IT solution providers that are out there that work with covered entities. So the covered entity and the IT solution provider need to have a business associate agreement in place. Then the IT solution provider needs to have a subcontractor business associate agreement in place with their upstream vendors. So we offer, obviously, email encryption, archiving, and email security. We have a subcontractor business associate agreement that we put in place with our IT solution providers, and then the IT solution providers have the business associate agreement that they put in place with their covered entities. We also have business associate agreements in place with our upstream providers, and I think this is one of the changes that happened with the HIPAA omnibus laws that went into effect on September 23rd. And we do have templates available, and it's actually available through the purchase of the HIPAA training and certification program. Here's a link to that URL, if you guys are interested or if you need to download that. Did you want to add anything to that? I know you have a lot of experience as well.
I would just add that I think that's the change that's really taken people by surprise a little bit, is that understanding that anyone who comes into contact with that PHI, even if they're just maintaining data, I mean, you're talking about email security, just coming into contact with data in that form, they're a business associate, and so they need to get those agreements signed with whoever, whatever covered entity is ultimately the source of that PHI. And I think that's taken people time to understand and sort of wrap their minds around what all the implications are of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we do have a number of questions from our audience. I'd certainly like to encourage those of us, or those members of the audience who haven't asked questions, to go ahead. And I would remind all of you that if we don't get to all of your questions, we'll follow up with written responses. And finally, one last note. Every once in a while, people ask kind of technical questions. We don't want to put our expert too much on the spot, so we certainly give him the option of deferring to written answers if people are asking for specific legal codes or, sometimes technical information. It's better to give a written response anyway. All right, let's go ahead and begin if we could. All right, let's start with this one. The question is, for a covered entity with patients from multiple states, do they have to worry about stricter state HIPAA law preemption for all the states the patients are from, or just the different data breach laws for those states?
That's a great question, and it's actually part of the HIPAA training, and the answer is both. So, for instance, California, the state law changes the HIPAA, reporting of a breach from 60 days, I believe, to 5 days, and that's the same with the California data breach notification law. So there are different data breach notification laws that go into, that require different penalties. It also requires different reporting, time frames for how much time you have to report a breach. As we mentioned earlier, I'm the chair of the IT security community at CompTIA, and we're also actively working with the public policy group on Capitol Hill to look at the national data breach notification law that will, it's in Congress right now. It's something that I think makes a lot of sense. There's some things in the national data breach notification law that do not make sense, and we're trying to remove the extraneous stuff out of there. But if you're looking at the state data breach notification laws today, there's 46 out of the 50 U.S. states have these laws, with the exception of Alabama, Kentucky, South Dakota, and New Mexico. And we've seen breaches out there that that spanned 40 or 50 states. And if you're looking for examples of breaches, I mean, Format has a variety of different resources. I follow a lot of their team on social media sites and Twitter and LinkedIn and so forth. But there's also another really good resource that I often use, and it's called datalossdb.org, and that's DATALOSSDB, as in database.org. And when you go to that website, you'll be able to break down every single breach that has occurred, this year, last year. I think it goes back to like 2003, what the source of the breach was, how, was it via email, was it via web, was it via stolen laptop, what vertical it was in, how many records were stolen, what the fines were. I mean, it's a very comprehensive site that I often give to our partners to, to talk to their customers with. And, it's one of those things that when you're looking at solutions and you face a federal or a state regulation that's out there, you're going to look at it in one of two ways. You're going to say, I can really gain and protect myself from this, so I'm going to go and I'm going to research solutions. I'm going to talk to my IT solution provider and figure out what the best option for me is. The second thing that we see is somebody saying, no, I don't really see, I'm too small. I have only 2 physicians. I'm not, really interested in that. I need to see somebody else go through pain beforehand. So it's the whole pain versus gain argument. And typically what we see is, looking at the site DatalossDB, you could find any breach that has occurred. You can find out what the fines are. You can look at the articles that are out there. 60% of all organizations that have a breach typically go out of business within 6 months. If you're a small business and you get fined $200 or $500,000 as a 2-physician practice, that's going to be, something that is going to really damage your business. And, in most cases, a lot of companies like that go out of business or claim bankruptcy. There's an example of, I think it was Mass Eye and Ear physician practice. There were 2 physicians. They were fined $500,000 for, I believe it was a breach of 450 records, something like that. So you get into some of these other examples, and it's that whole pain versus gain argument. In my opinion, the costs of these solutions are not significant, and IT solution providers that really focus on the healthcare vertical and the healthcare practice in general, typically have this down really, really well. And they can come in, they can do an audit, they can look at, what the risk is, they can look at the security holes that exist within your network, they can start plugging and patching right away and start implementing these solutions in a matter of, days. So I wouldn't be, too concerned with the cost that's associated with some of this stuff. I think the cost of not doing it is going to outweigh the cost of ignoring it tremendously.
Yeah, those are great points. And HIPAA applies to a one-doc practice just as much as it applies to a huge, university system. And we see breaches on both ends of the spectrum. And, being small, unfortunately, is no protection. And you still have to comply with the law. So those are all great points, I think.
And one other note on that, we've seen some court cases, being small, but also not having the resources to produce the information that is requested during the, e-discovery phase of a lawsuit is no excuse. And, we saw some examples where somebody had 450 backup tapes, and they needed to produce all pertinent information for a lawsuit over the last 7 years that applied, to this case. And they said they don't have the resources. The court ordered them to do it, gave them 30 days, and they estimated that cost just to find the information to produce during the discovery phase of the lawsuit to cost about $500,000. So, if you don't have an easy way to produce all electronically stored information over the last 7 years in a way that you can search the attachments and limit the to, the from, the time frame, words or phrases. I mean, if you don't have that capability and you get sued in civil court, you're going to need to produce that information, and it often becomes a challenge.
All right, so we have a question that I think will provide a nice opportunity for you to say just a little bit about what you offer at Reflection. The question is, can you suggest some cost-effective email HIPAA-compliant encryption programs we can use? Well, this is an education session, but we're near the end anyway, so I'll advance the slide. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about what you offer at Reflection, Scott, if you would.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, so Reflection actually offers a hosted anti-spam and email security solution that is fully integrated with a email archiving and e-discovery solution, as well as an email encryption service. There's a lot of benefits to the email encryption that we offer. It's, as I mentioned, completely automated, but it does integrate with both the archiving and the encryption. But a couple of other important notes is the way that everything works is that we have about 40 million encrypted users that exist within a directory. And that directory will allow the automatic encryption of email to those existing customers, so that the receiver will just get the email in plain text in their inbox because they already have the service installed. In addition to that, we didn't really talk much about the more technical side, the TLS encryption, but if we can establish a TLS connection to the receiving server, we won't encrypt it. We will send it via the TLS connection. So in other words, instead of securing the content of the email, we will secure the pipe over which the email is communicated. So in that animation that I showed you, you can't sniff or find the email when it's on the internet because the pipe is secured using TLS protocols. If you're interested in checking out our services, reflection.net is our website. We only sell through IT solution providers, so if you're an end-user customer, feel free to send an email to sales.HIPAA@reflection.net, and we can certainly put you in touch with one of our IT solution providers in your area. And if you are an IT solution provider, shoot us an email or register to become a partner. And if you are an end user, you can also have your IT solution provider contact us, and we'll be happy to get them set up and on our program.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to add that I'm sure there are many service providers on the webinar, and I don't know if there's ever been a greater opportunity for a win-win than medical providers working with their MSPs or their IT specialists to get these solutions in place, because there's such a need on the medical provider side, and the IT providers have the expertise to get them the solutions they need. It's just really a great win-win for both sides of that. Well, we are just about out of time, so I'd like to thank Scott for joining us. It's really been an informative session. I certainly enjoyed it.
Thank you. And if anybody needs, if anybody has any follow-up questions and you'd like to contact me directly, my email address is scott.formed@reflection.net. Feel free to shoot me an email or get in touch, and any other questions that were asked that we didn't have a chance to answer, we'll definitely get back to you. And so thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it as well. And as Scott said, we're going to assemble any of the questions we didn't get to and post answers on our site with links delivered via email later in the week. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. Again, you can learn more about Reflection, including their secure email and other services, by visiting www.reflection.net. And as you heard, Scott welcomed questions to him. You can also email us at FormatApproved, and we'd be happy to pass those on. I'd like to thank all of our attendees. Remember that all registered attendees will receive an email with links to both the slides and the video recording of this session. So if you'd like to review any of what you've heard, you'll have that opportunity. For comprehensive training in HIPAA security, register for FormatApproved Certified HIPAA Security Professional course, which we often call CHSP. This course is designed for IT specialists and other business associates, and the course includes updated templates of business associate agreements, both between covered entities and business associates, and between business associates and their subcontractors. The course is a great value, especially through the special discounts available through our partners at Reflection. So if you visit reflectiontraining.net and click on HIPAA and compliance, you can learn more about the course and register. Visit FormatApproved.com to learn more about our upcoming learning lunches. The Learning Lunch button on the bottom of the screen will take you to our entire slate of upcoming webinars where you can learn more and register. Our next Learning Lunch will air December 11th, that's tomorrow, and we'll cover the subject of Meaningful Use Stage 2 Action Plan. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are searching for an action plan about right about now. Keep an eye on your email box and our homepage for other upcoming topics, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Brian.